Verse 15 threw a little interesting curveball for all of you. Probably easy to skip over, but he said, murderer, thief, evildoer, meddler? Meddler? He's putting that on the same level as thief and murderer? Evildoer? Yes. Let's all take a strong hint out of that, because we all have our moments of meddling, don't we? And so let's be understanding that we might want to pray about, Abba, show me where I may have a problem meddling. Because maybe you don't think much of thinking, oh, well, I don't murder anybody and I'm not a thief and I don't do evil. But wait a minute, what about this meddling thing? Meddler. Because you know what happens when you do the meddling thing, when you meddle in other people's lives? You're stepping into the father's shoes and the son's shoes and doing their job. It's not your job. So let's not meddle. Now, there's a difference between meddling and going lovingly up to a brother and talking to them heart to heart and sharing with them something that you might see, and you may be accountability partners with them. That's different than meddling. And you guys all know the difference, and let's not split hairs over it. You know exactly what it's like. You don't like it when people meddle in your business, and you know they don't like it when you do it to them. So interesting that Abba would put that in the same place here. So don't let any of you suffer as a meddler or a murderer or a thief or an evildoer. Why? Because those guys deserve to suffer. He says, but if one suffers because of Messiah, let him not be ashamed. If you suffer for those other things, you should be ashamed. You deserve to suffer. Because that suffering is supposed to wake you up to stop doing it. It's a suffering that was supposed to spark a change in your behavior. What he's not talking about here, he's talking about here, if you suffer doing right, then count it as joy because Messiah also suffered, although he was right. They scourged him. They spit on him. They mocked him. He didn't deserve any of that. Often you may get the same treatment. He says, if you suffer as Messiah suffered, rejoice. Verse 17. He says, verse 17, because it is time for judgment to begin from the house of Elohim. And if firstly from us, what is the end of those who do not obey the good news of Elohim? So judgment is first on us. It first begins with us. Okay? Time for judgment to begin. And by the way, we are to use judgment. We're not to be judges. We're not to do judging. Okay? Let's understand the difference. I know this happens. I go through this every time, and the people always accuse me of confusing the issue. There's nowhere in Scripture that tells you to be a judge. It tells you to judge a situation. That's called judgment. Okay, a better word maybe be discernment. Okay? When you're judging the thing, the action, the situation as being something you should not participate in, you're not necessarily judging the ones doing the action. Does that make sense? Judgment is responding to what's going on, not rendering a judgment or a verdict on the person doing it. Let me give you an example. You happen to be at work and you see a bunch of people gathered around the water cooler, so to speak, and they're talking about some things that are inappropriate. You can fill in the blank what kind of inappropriate things it could be. It could be sexual jokes. It could be things about cheating at the work and stealing from the boss. It could be anything inappropriate. Okay? Now, in your judgment, you realize that's something that's going on that's inappropriate, and I can use discernment and judgment to realize I should not be involved in that. However, I'm not going to judge the people doing it. That's not my place to judge them and say, oh, what awful, horrible people they are and blah, blah, blah. No, don't judge them. Just use enough judgment to decide that you don't need to go participate. It shouldn't be that subtle a difference. It should be a very simple, straightforward difference. You're using judgment. In other words, you're judging the situation. That's called judgment. You're not judging the people. That would be called judging. Because now you're rendering a verdict on a person. And that's what we're told not to. He says, judge not, lest you be judged. However, we're supposed to inspect fruit. That's because we're looking at the fruit. You judge the fruit, you're not judging the person. And if you look at the fruit and say, that's bad fruit, I don't need to eat that fruit, I don't need to be messing with that fruit, that's judgment. Are we clear on that? I know that gets tough for some people. Okay, so you're allowed to be a fruit inspector, but you're not going to get mad at the plant that produced the fruit. And you're not going to judge that plant and condemn that plant that produced the bad fruit. You're just going to decide not to pick it up and eat it. Does that make sense? That's using judgment. That's judgment, okay? So he says, because it is time for judgment to begin from the house of Elohim, we need to be doing judgment. We need to be having better judgment in what we do and how we say it and what we participate in and what we receive. All of our actions need to come under judgment by us. We need to look at the fruit.